Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today I want to do a video where I essentially debunk a couple of myths regarding the UFL. Now, a couple of these are getting fully debunked, as a lot of people seem to just not understand some of these things, and some are more of a mostly debunking. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, essentially there are some myths about the UFL in regards to a lot of people making cases, statements about certain things, that you can simply disprove. These aren't just, opinionated things. These are things that have cold hard facts or evidence to back up a certain case that goes against these very common myths you'll see anywhere. Now, if you believe in any of these or did, you are not alone. I've seen many people across all the different landscapes, whether it be YouTube, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Instagram, whether it be Reddit, Discord, anywhere. There's a lot of people that seem to buy into these ones, and again, a couple of these are still kind of true, but it's more like a 10-20% true rather than like 100% like some people say. So if you end up learning something or agreeing with this or liking this, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And without further ado, let's get started with the first myth. The UFL owns blank. This is a big one. A lot of people seem to think the UFL owns a lot of things that it actually doesn't in regards to trademarks and all that. You can look up these trademarks to find out if it's being pended or stuff. Now, some of these teams that are currently playing are still technically being in the pending phase, whether it be certain things that happened. Some aren't. The point is, a lot of these trademarks aren't actually active that people think. Look, the USFL, which I will admit, a couple of these I did say they didn't own, they actually have kind of gone for them at certain points during the year. Pretty much all the USFL teams, at least the ones I looked up, all seem to be having, been gotten by USFL Enterprises, which is one of the two groups that are, with the UFL, obviously, along with XFL properties and all that. The point is, though, is that a lot of these teams, like the original UFL from like the 2013 or 2010s era, teams like the Nighthawks, technically aren't owned. They are currently not able to be brought back. Yes, the league could file for their trademarks to bring them back, but at this moment, they are not owned by the league. This goes for original XFL teams as well. Enforcers, the Enforcers, they are not currently available. The Demons, not currently available. The Rage, not currently available. So a lot of these teams that people seem to think, oh, the UFL can just bring them back like that, they technically can. Yes, they could easily file for these trademarks, and there's a very, very low shot that they're going to get, refused or anything. But they currently haven't yet. So if they don't already have those trademarks, they can't actually get the team right now. They can't just say, let's go with the Omaha Nighthawks, because then somebody else can just swoop in and get the Omaha Nighthawks trademark and all that. So at this moment, some teams or some brands the UFL does own, some they don't. You have to get a lot of trademarks overall for a lot of different things. You'll be able to look this up if you look up just the Battlehawks, Stallions. You'll see a bunch of different things. It's not just a trademark on the logo and the name, it's also branding and all that. So again, the first one is this UFL owns blank. Again, I've seen many people talk about how the league can bring back these old UFL teams. No, the league may have the UFL trademark now, the United Football League. They don't actually own all these other teams. And again, a lot of these trademarks are filed, and some of them are, all but registered. Some of them are actually registered. So you can't just bring back a team, because again, even if you file for a trademark, it's not a guarantee you're going to get it. It's a good shot you'll probably get it, especially with how the UFL is handling things, but it's not a guarantee. So the idea that they can just, bring back a team like that doesn't really make sense. And you can look it up, AAF trademarks, at least from the couple I looked up, also seem to be owned at the moment. So it's not like you can just bring back these teams all willy-nilly. You have to get these trademarks. And so currently the UFL is missing out on a lot of them, but I've seen so many people act as if the UFL does own these trademarks when in fact they don't. Now the next one is the UFL schedule is why so few players have signed to the NFL. This is the one where it's about maybe like 15-20% true. This is not the main reason. Let's get that fully out of the way. The USFL in the 2 seasons, across the 2 years, 3 seasons of spring football before this season, and during the full season of spring football era, so after the 2020 XFL, the USFL has had less players overall signed to the NFL on a per year basis than the XFL. That's why I'm saying it's about 10-15% true. Now, granted, in terms of the big impact players, the USFL, of course, had guys like Devontae Turpin and Brandon Aubrey, who, especially in Aubrey's case, were huge impact players, and a few others and all that. And yes, some will make the argument that the XFL had a lot of players that didn't play in the USFL in 2022 go there, which, again, true. The real reason why we've seen so few players signed so far from the UFL is a mix of training camp hasn't started yet. It's basically like starting around the time this video is coming out. It's like a couple days later or this day it comes out. And of course, because of the fact that a lot of these players have, well, already gotten invites a lot of times. Look, a lot of these players, especially since the league went down, from the 16 total teams across both leagues to 8, you condensed the talent. For an example, look at the tight end room. When you look at who were the best tight ends this past season, most of those guys were guys who have already been good tight ends in spring football or have already gotten NFL opportunities. Jay Sternberger, Sage Surratt, okay, Cody Latimer, another one. Then you also have Sal Cannella, Cole Hicutini. All these guys have been in spring football for anywhere from 2 years to 3 years, in guys like Sage Surratt's case. So it's one of those things, or Canella's case. So it's one of those things where it's the big reason, the real meat of the reason, is because a lot of these guys have already gotten their opportunities in the NFL before. So a lot of these guys have also shown themselves in spring football before. So they're not just going to get all these invites every single offseason. Again, like I mentioned, some of the XFL players are like an AJ McCarron, who's basically always on some form of practice squad or backup role, whereas the USFL really didn't have that to the same degree. And again, in terms of who made the NFL roster, when you look at the overall percentage, it's also still pretty similar. The XFL in 2023 had, 69 players who signed deals at some point. Then 24 of them made an NFL roster, whether it be a practice squad, whether it be as a backup or something, that did make it. Whereas the USFL, did have 27 less UFL or players go to the NFL. They also only had 10 less that just straight up made a roster. So it's still overall percentage-wise about the same. So the idea that the schedule is why so few players are signing isn't true. Again, it's about 15% true probably, maybe 20, but it's less than a fourth. The real meat and bones of the reason is because of the fact that a lot of these players have already gotten their NFL shots or have already been in spring football for a couple of years, and the NFL guys just don't want to go for them. And of course, because we're still at a very early stage in the offseason. Now, yes, we usually see more guys get signed at this point, but if you remember the USFL, especially in year one, it was like you had the first guy, it was Christian Sam, if I remember correctly, get signed, and then the floodgates started opening later. Remember, the USFL season ended even later than the UFL season, to where players could get signed later than the UFL could, and that was a much closer to the training camp date. So when we get to training camp and we start seeing injuries, which you never want to see, but that will happen, we'll see more UFL players signed. But the idea that the schedule is the biggest reason why few players have signed is not true. It has a bit of impact, but being the main reason is not true. It is not the biggest one, and that is a big myth. It is about 15% of the reason. The main reason is just how many of these guys have already been in spring football, and that's kind of what happens when you make it go from 16 total teams to 8. Now, the last one is the UFL championship game has to be in a city with a UFL team. We're kind of going to do a double trouble here. We're going to kind of hit two different birds with one stone. Number one is the idea that the championship game should be in a place or should be where the number one seed is. And the second one is that you can't host the championship game in a neutral site field. The first one I just want to get out of the way is the idea that the number one seed, or essentially the home team in the championship game, should get home field advantage. This is a flat out not going to happen. The league already couldn't even get the USFL championship game to have multiple dates, as of course we saw that Ford Field already had stuff involved, stuff going on. There's no way in hell they're going to get 8 different stadiums to have the day open for the UFL. It's just not going to happen. And the UFL ain't going to spend the money that would be required to also do that as well, potentially. So that's not happening. Now, of course, the other issue is that would mean that you'd only have a week, even if you put a bye week in between the championship game and the playoffs, which you would not do. Even then, you'd have a max of 2 weeks, but if you are being realistic, they're not going to have a break, so it would be 1 week to sell tickets. Yeah, you're going to have terrible attendance. For all the hype St. Louis had, their home playoff game, the first one, didn't have nearly the amount of people that were expected, and a large part of that was because of how late the ticket sales came out. It came out a week before the game. So the idea that the home team in the championship game should get home field advantage, yeah, that's not happening, and that probably never will happen in the UFL, even if it gets bigger. Now, the main one is, of course, the neutral field game. Let's just put it very simply. Yes, this is the 2022 USL Championship game picture that I have. The 2023 game definitely had a few thousand less, but I'll talk about it in a second. The official attendance numbers are paid attendance, right? The 27,000 that the UFL Championship game had was paid attendance. How many tickets were paid for? The actual attendance for that game, we all know, was way less than 20K, and honestly might have been less than 15,000. When you compare it to the USFL game, which had an announced attendance of like 20K, probably attendance a bit less than that, but still looked like it was more than 15K in a smaller stadium, which looked better on TV. The USFL did. In fact, it looked better both years. Now, the first XFL year wasn't nearly as bad as this past UFL year, but overall, in terms of the championship game, the USFL's decision to go to a neutral site that is a smaller stadium, in terms of an eye appeal, has actually worked. Look, you can't really hide the terrible attendance that was in St. Louis. You couldn't. Because even in the 100s, as I tweeted out when I was at the game, I should not be in the fourth row at the 50-yard line and see over 10 seats in front of me being vacant. I just shouldn't see that. You know what I didn't see? Granted, I was the first row in that one, but behind me, I did not see empty seats at the USFL Championship game in 2023. A huge reason for that is because of the fact that it is a smaller stadium. And the other one is one people don't talk about. It's commitment to going to the game. If you were to have bought a ticket for the UFL Championship game and you lived in the St. Louis area or around there, you're a max like 3 hours away willing to drive there. That's kind of how my benchmark is. If it's 3 hours away, it's within driving range. If it's within 3 hours, you don't have to really do anything special. You don't have to call off work. You don't have to, make it a vacation. Whereas if it's at a neutral site, which is going to be away from you, if you're in a place with a team, like the 3 cities in Texas, DC, Birmingham, all that, you're going to have to make a commitment to go there if you want to go, right? You're going to have to say, hey, I might have to take off a couple days of work. I might have to get a plane ticket early. There's a lot of things you might have to do. So you're more willing to go even if your team doesn't make it because you've already made a commitment for that championship game. So the odds of you going to the game, even if your team doesn't make it, are much better than in the home stadium scenario where you're the Battlehawks, a bunch of fans buy tickets because the team's in the playoffs, they lose the first round playoff game, and then a bunch of them, they spent less than $100 per ticket, they're only a couple hours away, they don't have any commitment, they can just say, nah, I don't want to go. You can't really do that to the same extent in a neutral stadium that's, it's somewhere like Canton where it's anywhere from a small to a pretty decent, trip across all the other team locations. The fact is that a lot of people wanting Tom Benson's Hall of Fame stadium back, they understand that it is the best case scenario for the league. The main reason for that is because of the fact that the championship game, right, that's a TV product. Like everybody talks about how the attendance isn't the biggest deal in terms of, it mattering for money and all that, but they still don't care about that. They still hate the numbers and all that. You want the championship game to have at least a good eye appeal. Which is better eye appeal? Having 15,000 people in a 60,000 person stadium or having 10,000 people in a 20,000 seat stadium? The 10,000 is much better because it looks more filled. Instead of it being a barren wasteland, it actually looks like a half-filled stadium. That's the biggest issue with having the championship game in a massive place like a dome. You're relying on a team making it. The UFL execs definitely wanted the Battlehawks to make the championship game because they knew the attendance was going to be really good if they made it. They didn't make it, so while they did get a decent paid attendance number, the actual in-person number was definitely bad. Whereas the USFL championship games, even in 2023 where the 200s were pretty barren, they pretty much had everybody move to like the 100s to where it still looked really filled if you only looked at the 100s. It's like if you watch wrestling or something and you hear people talk about WWE versus AEW. WWE events, everywhere around where the ring is, there's people there. Whereas in AEW, they have people in like the hard shots, I believe is what it's called, where the camera is. But behind the camera, it's basically empty. That's what you kind of want. You want it to be where wherever the camera is, there's people. You can do that better at a small neutral field place than you can at a home stadium that is in a massive stadium. Because again, if you have like 10,000 to 15K show up at Tom Benson's Memorial Stadium and you put them all in the 100s, you just don't show the 200s, it looks pretty filled. Whereas when you're at a place like St. Louis, even if you sell a lot of tickets because of how many people don't show up, you're going to have to either move everybody down, which you can't really do at a big stadium like that, as effectively as a smaller one. But mainly the big issue is the fact that it's going to look terrible no matter what, because again, even if you have 15 to 20,000, you're going to have a ton of open areas. So I think that overall, this myth that the UFL has to have a championship game in a city, no. Look, it's one game. Yes, you're going to lose out on money in a sense of the overall ticket sales, but you're going to benefit greatly from what actually looks good on TV, right? The DC Defenders are the biggest example of this past season. Many games, their announced attendance numbers were great, but you knew this is like an 18,000 seat stadium. You know it's not even halfway filled. You know there's not actually 14,000 people there. Whereas in a smaller stadium like Tom Benson's, if you were to hear, hey, there's like 13,000 ticket sales, there might only be 10K actually at the game, but it looks a lot better, especially if you don't show the 200s where there's no people. You can actually think there might be 13K there. That's the big difference as well. And again, for this being a made-for-TV league, as some people like to call it, again, you want more people at the game rather than more people buying tickets. So you still want them to actually pay for it. You don't want to have it be where, you only having people show up because they're getting, for free. But the point is, you'd rather have there be, more people versus the overall stadium. You want more percentage filled. You'd rather have it be where you have about like 50% less ticket sales or less people show up, but it's, like 50% more filled. You'd rather have that. And so when you have that, it's why going back to Tom Benson is a good idea. Or hell, you can do a Hail Mary and go to a place that has a potential expansion team on the horizon, right? People think Omaha, Oklahoma City, New Orleans could get teams or are going to get teams. Why don't you just put the championship game there as, like, why not? Let's see if people show up for it kind of thing. You could do that as well. You can't do that if you're only having games at a city where there's a team. And you, again, have that risk of what happened this past season where a bunch of people buy tickets to just not even show up. But we'll see. That'll do it. So overall, that'll do it for debunking 3 different UFL myths. Let me know down below if you believed in any of these and if your opinion has changed after this, or if you always disagreed with all those myths and all that, or what your thoughts are. If you end up enjoying this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I am doing a giveaway at 1,000 subscribers. And naturally, we are getting pretty close to that. We're less than 200 away. I will be streaming the UFL college draft next week on Wednesday. Probably will start the stream like around 11 because it'll probably be a little bit before they actually announce stuff, but we'll see. As always, guys, have a great night.